Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Sallallahu wa sallam ala Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. Imma ba'd, on this 21st day of the month of Dhul Qa'dah of the year 1438 after the Hijrah, coinciding with the 13th of the month of August 2017, Common Era, we continue with our readings and light commentary within Minhaj al-Salikin wa Tawdih al-Fiqh fi ad-Din, and within this work that has been authored by the illustrious scholar Sheikh Abdurrahman ibn Nasir al-Sa'di, we are focusing on Kitab al-Nikah. We're focusing on the book of marriage. And thus far, we've covered the introductory matters to this book. We have gone over the marital ceremony when the actual marriage itself takes place, when the agreement to marriage takes place. We have also covered the conditions of marriage, and we have entered into the prohibitions within marriage, meaning who is it prohibited to marry. And we mentioned that those who are prohibited to marry are divided into two categories. They are those who are permanently prohibited to marry and those who are temporarily prohibited to marry. And we were almost through the entire of those who are permanently prohibited to marry, but we will go back over it and move forward from where we left off. Those who are prohibited to marry permanently, there are 7 of them, and they are as follows. And we are speaking firstly with regards to one's blood lineage, blood relations. Mothers, and upward from them, grandmothers, great-grandmothers. Secondly, daughters, and those beneath them, granddaughters, great-granddaughters. Thirdly, sisters, in the absolute unrestricted sense. Fourthly, their daughters, meaning your nieces. And fifthly, the daughters of one's brothers, also nieces. So regardless of whether they are nieces from one's brothers or one's sisters, they are prohibited to marry in the permanent sense. Sixthly, paternal aunts. Seventhly, maternal aunts. Now, moving forward from here, and this is all still review, there are 7 types of people who are prohibited to marry permanently from nursing. And these 7 are the same 7 that we previously mentioned. However, the first 7 are from blood relation, and the next set of 7, they are from relation due to nursing. Next, we have 4 types of in-laws that are prohibited to marry in the permanent sense. Firstly, the mothers of one's wives. The mothers of one's wives. Upward from there. So your mother-in-law and her mother, prohibited to marry. Secondly, their daughters, meaning the daughters of one's wives. The daughters of one's wives, and then downward from them. So your stepdaughters and their daughters and their daughters. But there's a caveat here. إذا كان قد دخل بأمهاتهن. If the husband has entered their mothers, meaning if the husband has consummated the marriage with the mother through intercourse, then it becomes prohibited at that point in time to marry the stepdaughters. Thirdly, the wives of one's father. The wives of one's father. And then upward from there. Stepmother, permanently cannot marry her. And then upward from her, her mother and her mother. Fourthly, and we're still dealing with in-laws. The fourth type of in-law that is prohibited to marry in the permanent sense. The wives of one's sons. The wives of one's sons, your daughter-in-law. And then downward from her, her children, her children's children. This be the case whether it is from blood or from nursing. From blood or from nursing. Now, these are the individuals that are prohibited to marry in the permanent sense. Well, we have to add to this 2 points. One, for women, we would just reverse the relationships. And then we would have all the people that are permanently prohibited for a woman to marry. So, for example, the 7 from one's blood relation that are prohibited to marry. Firstly, the author mentions mothers, and then upward from there. For the women, it will be fathers, and then upward from there. Fathers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers, thus and so. Thus and so. Secondly, all of these people who are permanently prohibited to marry, they become the family of that person. So now we're speaking to family structuring and family building within Islam, the Islamic model. So then once we understand that, if it is permanently prohibited to marry a given person, then the man that's prohibited to marry this particular female, this particular woman, now becomes a mahram for her. And this is how we get our maharim. Now, the origin concerning this, meaning the evidence concerning this, is his statement, the Exalted, as has come in the chapter in Nisa, verses 23 as well as 24. And we'll take it. We'll take it. The author mentions a portion of the verse, but we'll read through, inshallah ta'ala. Surah An-Nisa, verse number 23. حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ. Your mothers are prohibited for you. وَبَنَاتُكُمْ, and your daughters. وَخَوَاتُكُمْ, and your sisters. وَعَمَّاتُكُمْ, and your paternal aunts. وَخَالَاتُكُمْ, and your maternal aunts. وَبَنَاتُ الْأَخْ, and the daughters of your brother. وَبَنَاتُ الْأُخْتِ, and the daughters of your sister. Your nieces, be they from your brothers, or from your sisters. وَمُهَاتُكُمْ alati arda'nakum, and your mothers who have wet nursed you. And your mothers who have wet nursed you, prohibited for you to marry them. وَخَوَاتُكُمْ min رَضَاعَةٍ, and your sisters due to wet nursing. Your sisters due to nursing. Because as we'll see in the hadith that will come shortly, inshallah ta'ala, nursing prohibits what blood relation prohibits. Nursing prohibits what blood relation prohibits. So once a particular woman nurses a child, then all of her children become brothers and sisters to the one that she has nursed. And she becomes related to the remainder of her family, the same way that her children are related to the remainder of her family. وَأُمُّهَاتُ نِسَائِكُمْ, and the mothers of your wives, your mother-in-law. وَرَبَائِبُكُمْ اللَّاتِي فِي حُجُورِكُمْ مِنْ نِسَائِكُمْ اللَّاتِي دَخَلْتُمْ بِهِنْ, and your stepdaughters who live in your homes, and you have entered into their mothers. Meaning you have consummated the marriage with their mothers through intercourse. At that point, it is permanently prohibited to marry those stepdaughters of yours. وَإِن لَمْ تَكُونُوا دَخَلْتُمْ بِهِنَّ فَلَا جُنَاهَ عَلَيْكُمْ, and if you have not entered upon them, if you have not consummated the marriage with their mother, then there is no sin upon you. وَحَلَائِلُ أَبْنَائِكُمْ الَّذِينَ مِنْ أَصْلَابِكُمْ, and the wives of your sons who are from your loins, and the wives of your sons that are from your blood relation and your lineage. Meaning what? Meaning your daughter-in-law. وَإِن تَجْمَعُوا بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ, and to join between two sisters. This is also prohibited. إِلَّا مَا قَدْ سَلَفْ, except for that which is already preceded. إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ غَفُورًا رَحِيمًا, then certainly Allah is all forgiving, most merciful. So let's look at this. It is prohibited to join between two sisters, except in the situation where it has already preceded. What does that mean? What do we believe that means? It is prohibited to join between two sisters, except in the scenario of what has already preceded. What is that saying? What do we think? Okay, let's take that a step further. Do we have any examples of that in Islam? Do you know of anyone who married two sisters in Islam? Uthman, radiyallahu an, good. Uthman married two sisters who were the daughter of who? The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if it is prohibited to marry two sisters, how was Uthman able to do that? Good. One had passed away. Good. So when you are no longer married to one sister, then it can become permissible to marry the other sister. In this instance, one sister had passed away, and then the Prophet ﷺ offered his next daughter to Uthman. Good. That's verse 23. We now move on to verse 24. And just so that we're not overly lengthy, we'll just take the interpretation of the verse. And also prohibited to you are all married women, except those your right hand possesses. This is the decree of Allah upon you. And lawful to you are all others beyond these, provided that you seek them in marriage with gifts from your property, dowry, desiring chastity, and not unlawful intercourse. So whatever you enjoy of marriage from them, give them their due compensation as an obligation. And there is no blame upon you for what you mutually agree upon or what you mutually agree to beyond the obligation. Indeed, Allah is ever knowing and wise. And we'll get to this as well, meaning a person adding further stipulations within the marriage by way of a verbal agreement or by way of written contract. Good. Returning back to the text of the treatise. Evidences for who it is prohibited to marry permanently. And his statement, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, يحرم من الرضاع ما يحرم من النسب أو يحرم من الرضاع ما يحرم من النسب أو من الولادة متفق عليه, agreed upon. And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he stated, nursing prohibits what blood relation prohibits or what birth prohibits. So all the same relationships that we have spoken about that are prohibited permanently through blood relations, then when one is nursed, then you become the child of the one that nursed you, and then all these same prohibitions apply to blood relationships. And this is the evidence for that in this particular hadith that comes in the Bukhari as well as Muslim. Moving forward. Temporarily prohibited marriages. From them is his statement, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لا يجمع بين المرأة وعمتها. One should not join between a woman and her paternal aunt. ولا بين المرأة وخالتها. And one should not join between a woman and her maternal aunt. Hadith is agreed upon. And this is coupled with the statement of the Exalted that is coming in Surah An-Nisa, verse 23, that we just read shortly, just a short while ago. When تَجْمَعُ بَيْنَ الْأُخْتَيْنِ. And it is prohibited to join between two sisters. Moving forward. It is not permissible for a free man to marry more than 4 women. And it is not permissible for one who is enslaved to join between more than 2 wives. And this would be an interesting point of research because of the fact that the one who is enslaved does not have freedom. And we also have peoples in our country who do not have their freedom when they are incarcerated. So an interesting point of research would be, could we perform qiyas? Could we perform analytical comparison, and then lay the evidence for one who is enslaved who doesn't have their freedom being limited to marrying 2 at max to one that is incarcerated, and this limitation be placed upon them as well. As for an individual who has ownership over maidservants, then it is for this person to enjoin an intimacy with those said maidservants. Now, if a non-Muslim embraces Islam and he's married to 2 sisters at the time that he embraces Islam, then he is to choose one of the 2 of them, but he cannot remain with both. Or if a non-Muslim embraces Islam and he has more than 4 wives, more than 4 women that he is dealing with or that he's married to, then he is to select 4 of them, and the remainder the remainder ought to be separated from him. Now, we look further into prohibitions. After a woman enters into a state of ihram, it is not permissible to marry her until she comes out of her state of ihram. When would a woman be entering into a state of ihram? Into this heightened state of spirituality? Good. So during Hajj and during Umrah, doing both the major and the minor pilgrimage, the woman is entering into ihram. So when she is in the state of ihram, she can't marry in that situation. It's prohibited to marry her while she's in that state. Good. Someone else that is prohibited to marry. A woman who is in her R.E.D.A period, in her waiting period from another marriage with another person, until she reaches the end of her waiting period, or until waiting period has elapsed. Yes.
How long is that waiting period?
If it is a talaq, if it is a divorce, then it is 3 menstrual cycles.
90 days.
Give or take. 3 menstrual cycles, depending on how her cycles are. If the cycles are irregular for any reason, then it becomes 3 months, from the time the divorce was pronounced. If she is pregnant, then the waiting period is extended until she gives birth. Moving forward, those who are prohibited to marry. The Zania and the Zani. The two people who have fornicated, it is prohibited for them to marry one another or for them to marry anyone else until they have repented. Until they have repented. Fourthly, a woman who has been divorced 3 times over. A woman who has been divorced 3 times by the same husband within the same marriage. It is prohibited for that husband to marry her again until she marries someone else. That marriage is consummated. There is intercourse. And then this new marriage dissolves. She separates from him and completes her iddah period and completes her waiting period. If all of that happens, then she can marry the first husband, and if not, then it's prohibited for him to marry her. It is permissible for an individual, for a man who owns maidservants, to join between 2 sisters. However, he can only engage in intimacy with one and not the other until there is something that will prohibit him from engaging in intimacy with the sister that he was engaged in intimacy with, such as him no longer owning her, or if she were to marry someone else after it has been made clear that she is not pregnant. Now, when we speak to the hadith, الرضاعة تحرم وما يحرم الولادة, that nursing prohibits what blood relation prohibits. When we speak to this hadith, then the relationship that we are speaking to, or rather the type of nursing that we are speaking to, is before they are weaned off of nursing. Before they are weaned off of nursing. Meaning these relationships come into place when a child is nursed before the age of 2. So from 0 to 2, if the child is nursed by a particular woman, then the child becomes the child of that woman, and those relationships become solidified. If it is before the age of 2. Along with this, though, the child must have a minimum of 5 nursing sessions before the age of 2 in order for the relationship to settle. And it is at this point that the child becomes related to all of her other children as brothers and sisters. And from there, everyone those children that her children are related to, the child that is nursed is now related to in the same fashion. This concludes our discussion on prohibited marriages. We now move on to the next section. Babu Shurut fin Nikah. Stipulations within marriage. So we've spoken about what marriage is, how it occurs, and who's prohibited to marry. What about added stipulations that we place on the person we are going to marry? How does that take place? And what is going on with that? So again, this occurs when one of these spouses places added stipulations upon the other spouse. So whenever this occurs, then these stipulations are divided into two different categories. You have sahih and you have fasid. You have that which is valid and you have that which is invalid. You have valid stipulations and invalid stipulations. Firstly, we will look to the valid stipulations. This is when, for example, the wife stipulates upon the husband that he cannot marry anyone else other than her. Valid. Or that if he has a maidservant, then he cannot be intimate with her in secret, where it's unknown. That stipulation can be made by the wife if the husband agrees to it. For another example, she stipulates upon him that she doesn't have to move out of her home, or she doesn't have to leave her city or her country or her state. Or it can be an increase in the dowry or a decrease in the dowry, or any stipulation that is similar to this. Then all of this is included within his statement, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The stipulations that have the most right to be fulfilled are those stipulations that are made due to what makes the private parts permissible for the other, meaning marriage. And this hadith is agreed upon. Now, some examples of invalid stipulations. Temporary marriage, the mut'ah marriage. If a person stipulates this upon the other, it's invalid. It doesn't count. And the temporary marriage is where two people come together to marry, and there's an expiration date on the marriage. We'll be married for 30 days. We'll be married for 1 year. And then after that, the marriage will dissolve. And you agree to that. That would be an invalid stipulation. Meaning what? We cannot enter into marriage with any understanding that we intend to divorce the other. We don't enter into a marriage with an open understanding that we're going to divorce. Because the goal is for marriages to have longevity from this life into the hereafter. Also, a prohibited stipulation is what's called tahleel, where you have the irrevocable divorce that has taken place. A man has divorced his wife 3 times throughout their marriage. Now he can't marry her. He wants to be back with her. So we find the good brother, A, he marries your ex-wife with the intent of divorcing her so that she can marry the first husband. That's invalid. That cannot happen. Also, another invalid stipulation, as an example, would be where you have 2 men that are guardians over a woman that is under them. And then the 2 of them agree to marry the other to the woman that is under their guardianship in order to eliminate the dowry. In order to eliminate the dowry. This is an invalid stipulation, and this cannot occur. If it does occur, it doesn't count. So the Prophet ﷺ, he at one time offered a concession for the mut'ah marriage, for the temporary marriage, for reasons. for reasons that we won't go into detail in this sitting, but for reasons due to war and travel and expeditions and the like, and being away from one's family for an extended period of time, it was made permissible for a period of time, but then it was made prohibited. And we also find that the one who engages in tahleel, meaning when we have the irrevocable divorce and the first husband cannot now marry the ex-wife because he's divorced her 3 times over, and then a third party is brought in just to marry her and divorce her so that she can come back to the first husband, those people are all cursed. Those people are all cursed. And the Prophet ﷺ, he has prohibited the marriage of shigar, and it is the scenario that we just described to you. This is where you have 2 guardians that have women under their guardianship, and each one agrees to marry, makes an agreement to marry the woman under his guardianship to the other person without there being any dowry between them. Prohibited. And all the hadith in this regard that make mention of these matters are sound. We now come to the final chapter in the book of marriage. Babul Uyub fin Nikah. There's a better word for Uyub than the one that we're going to share. Uyub is the plural of the word aib. And an aib is like a fault or a deficiency, some form of blemish. And there's a more specific word for this that isn't coming to us at present. In any regard, the chapter of blemishes within marriage. And this occurs when one of the spouses finds something out about the other spouse that was not known before the act, before the agreement to marry. You find out something about them that you didn't know. And it's something that is detrimental to the marriage itself, such as insanity or having certain types of illnesses or diseases. In this scenario, or things that are similar to this, in this scenario, it is for that spouse who found out about this to what is the word we're looking for? To absolve the marriage. And there's a better word for that as well. But the term is fasakh. To absolve the marriage, to dissolve the marriage. And there's a word, we do this in the English courts as well. It's, subhanAllah, the word is not coming to me, but you all know the word. Let's say, for example, the Catholics, because in their faith it's prohibited for them to divorce. So because it's prohibited for them to divorce, they will utilize this option and absolve themselves of the marriage. But there's a term for it. Annulment, correct. Annulment, good. So in the scenario where one spouse finds something out about the other spouse that they were not made privy to before the act, before the agreement of marriage. And the examples that we given earlier, maybe the person is insane, they have a form of insanity, some mental health illness or deficiency. Maybe they have some other form of physical illness, some ailment, something. At this point, it is now permissible for this person to seek an annulment of the marriage if they choose to do so. Now, if, let's say, the woman finds out that the husband is impotent, then this is extended, the marriage is extended for a year. If he remains upon his situation and he's not treated or healed from that situation, then it is for her to seek an annulment of the marriage. We have another scenario. The next scenario is when we have a maidservant who is freed, but her husband was also a servant. So you have a woman that was enslaved and a man that is enslaved, and they're both married to one another. She's freed, he isn't. At this point in time, she then has the power of choice. She can choose to remain with him, or she can choose to no longer remain with him. And this is due to the hadith of Aisha, and it's a longer hadith. It's a story of Barira, who was in this situation. And she chose to depart from her husband at that point in time. And her husband's name was Mughith. So she chose to separate or detach from the marriage at that point in time. Hadith muttafaqun alayhi. The hadith is agreed upon. Now, if the marriage is annulled before consummation, then there is no dowry that is due. If the marriage is annulled before consummation of the marriage, then the dowry is no longer due. And if an annulment is sought after consummation of the marriage, then the dowry stays. The woman keeps the dowry. However, at this point in time, it is for the husband, if he so chooses, to seek out the one that misled him. It is for him to seek out the one that misled him. It did not inform him, whether it was the father or whoever was the guardian over the woman that he married. Now here, this actually concludes the book of marriage as it comes in Minhaj al-Salikin, the path of the journeyman. Now, what we will do though, we will take the time to at least take a portion of the next book. The next book that comes after this is Kitab al-Sadaq, the book of Sadaq. And we may not be as familiar with the term Sadaq, but the term Sadaq is synonymous with the term Mahar. So Sadaq is the dowry. So this is often a separate book in books of fiqh, in books of jurisprudence. So we will discuss the affairs of the dowry beginning next week. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله على محمد.